So, back in August last year, we all fretting about the NR lawsuit when it settled.
Right. And there was this kind of widespread feeling that compensation was going like down the
The
toilet.
drain.
Yeah, yeah. Drain to sound
So,
better.
let us show you some data and prove to you that is not the case.
Yeah, that's not what we're seeing at all. So
Absolutely not.
my name's Alan Rich. I'm the managing broker here at Maximum Realtor Partners.
My name is Ming Richardson, I'm the compliance broker for Maximum One Realty and Realtor Partners.
So there was a very recent Federal Reserve paper where they talk about what has been the effect of the NAR lawsuit as it relates to compensation. And one thing that they did was they went in and said, hey, what's happened to compensation, over
Since
the last
1990.
yeah, since and since 1990 the 1990s, overall real estate agent compensation has dropped ever since the 90s, right? It's gone down on a fairly steady trend. And the other thing that the Federal Reserve identified was that it's not consistent across the entire United States.
So, the percentage did decrease depending on what your sale price is. So, if you are selling $1 million and over, guess what? Your commission is less than 3% on the average.
Yeah,
So if you're selling between half a million to a million, you're right in between.
it
But
could be.
for anything less than $500,000, you're right on the money on the 3% normally.
Well, it just kind of depended, and what I mean, we're talking about different studies here, and so the first one is that what the Federal Reserve found is that the higher the purchase price,
Mm-hmm.
the lower the overall agent
Percentage
was.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's basically kind of what we already see. We see that same here in Atlanta. You would see it from state to state. You would see that overall, like in places where purchase price was incredibly high, New York, California, that kind of stuff, compensation may be less than 2%. It's and depending on because it when you're selling a multi-million-dollar home, it's not that it's fairly uncommon to have higher compensation percents. If you're selling homes that are 150,000 or $250,000,
You probably will have a higher
those
percentage.
compensations are going up. And honestly, this is just like normal market forces. It's really
It's common
more.
sense, actually.
That's exactly the term I was going to use, right? This is just common sense. Now, at the same time, the other thing that's going to come out through this whole thing is are the majority of sellers still paying buyer agent or still funding buyer agent compensation?
Yes, they are.
And it really, really is. As of right now, we are still seeing where the vast majority of transactions, the seller is still agreeing to cover the buyer's agent compensation because it's being requested in there. And so the big kicker here is that ever since the NAR lawsuit, I kind of feel like we have more transparency, more clarity going into real estate transactions. And we're seeing where buyer's agents must have a buyer signed buyer brokerage agreement or some sort of an agreement between themselves and the buyer prior to showing any homes. Um, that, on one hand, is where we're negotiating our buyer's agent compensation between us and the buyer themselves.
Our clients.
And the reason that that's such an important step in there is because that negotiation is now happening between the buyer's agent and the buyer. However, for the buyer to buy, when they make offers on properties, we're seeing where those buyers are requesting of the seller to cover that compensation.
And this is a good thing because honestly, when the seller bought their home back in the
It was
days,
the same thing.
it's the same thing. It is more transparency at this point than it was before. So rather than just assume, now everybody's on the same page when it comes to compensation and how things are being paid.
But see, in the past, especially some of these government agencies that wanted to say, well, agents are steering. Agents are only steering folks to properties that have higher compensation. Well, that's not really the case because we have agents that are negotiating their fees with the buyer themselves. And the buyers are requesting this of the seller, not in a way that steers, but because it's an affordability issue for our
And
buyers.
not only that, the buyer now knows exactly before signing on a binding contract what their obligation is or if there's any based on the offer. So they don't have to sign a counter offer. The seller came out with a lesser compensation. They can insist on this is what I need or buy your house at this price.
So, one of the big fallouts from the NAR lawsuit that we are very happy about is the fact that we are having signed buyer brokerage agreements prior to showing properties. And as a buyer's agent, please make sure that you are setting those appointments well in advance, and don't just do the
Educate
whole,
them.
don't do the thing where you're standing in the doorway saying, if you sign this, I'll let you see the house. That's not what a buyer brokerage agreement is. This is where we state these are the services that we provide, this is the term, all this kind of stuff, and then these are the fees that we charge. And we do that well in advance, and provide value right up front. Now, on the listing agent side, one thing that we strongly would
Encourage
encourage you
you
is negotiate your compensation and then prepare your seller.
for the buyer compensation as well. Because once again, in today's market, due to the outside forces that are beyond our control, buyers are still apprehensive about the purchases and they want to make sure that they can truly afford it. In order to do that, they're going to request that compensation to be covered by the seller just because um, that's what they need.
Well, but see, the thing is that the days of the seller being able to dictate what the buyer's agent was going to get compensated,
Correct.
those days are kind of behind us now, right? Because the buyer and the buyer's agent have negotiated for their compensation. So let's say that your seller decides that, you know what, we're going to offer 4 bananas, but your buyer and the buyer's agent has negotiated for, say, 7 bananas. Now, for that buyer, that becomes an affordability issue.
Correct.
They have to come out of the pocket 3 more bananas, and maybe they don't want to come out, or maybe they can't afford to come out of the pocket. So, all we're saying is that for smart listing agents, prepare your sellers. It doesn't mean that the seller has to accept that. Seller doesn't have to pay compensation if they choose not to. But for a lot of our buyers, will they be able to afford that home
Well,
if
not
they have
only
to pay
that,
their agent up front?
if once again the house is only worth what the buyer is willing to pay for, that includes a compensation in there. So if the seller is unwilling to sell, they absolutely have the right not to sell. But understand that may make their inventory on the market much longer time, and then get discouraged or blame the agents,
Yeah.
which often that happens. Um, and then find someone else that's going to tell them the same thing, and then they'll give it a shot again.
Well,
So
but for our buyers, this is an affordability issue. They're wanting to be able to buy the home and finance in the compensation the same way as when your seller
mhm.
probably bought their home in most cases. So the only reason we're bringing that up is because we want you to kind of understand what's kind of happened with compensation. Yes, compensation has gone down since the 1990s. We get that. However, what's happened to agent compensation since the NAR rule has gone in?
It's actually gone up a little
Compensation is,
bit.
I mean, like now, granted, like before, right before the NAR lawsuit came in, it was the average buyer agent compensation was 2.38%, and then it was 2.36, and then it was 2.37. Right now, buyer agent compensation is
2.4.
2.4.
That's the average. And we're talking about luxury homes
We're talking, we're
along
talking, we're,
with
talking, we're talking about
starting
all buyer
homes.
agent
Yeah,
compensation across the United States, but overall buyer agent compensation
has increased.
has not gone down, right? And that was the whole thing. Like before this was like, oh, the sky is falling. There's
Of
no more
course.
buyer agent compensation. There's no, like dogs and cats living together. It's just pandemonium, right? Everybody was worried about all this kind of stuff. And realistically, that's not what we're seeing. Now, inside that, if you break down the buyer agent compensation, right?
So if you look at sales less than $500,000, they're actually rising.
Those
Um,
compensations are up even more so. We're seeing where the average buyer agent compensation for homes under 500,000 are
Rising.
2.49. Yeah, and increasing, steadily increasing 2.49% on homes under half a million. Now,
For homes from between half a million to $1 million, they're also increasing.
but not quite as high. That's running at 2.29. So
That's correct.
but it is on a positive trend. Now, the difference here on homes over $1 million.
And they're about 2.17. So we're looking at this data as a whole throughout the United States. Once again, just remind you, real estate's very local. So don't assume the number that we publish out is what's going on in your market, because that may not be the case. Your
Well, and
market may be higher or lower. A experienced agent knows exactly what their market's doing. So do your study on that.
yeah, but there is no set fees. There's no set compensation. There's no average. There's no norm. We're just telling you these are the numbers nationwide. Please don't take this to be that this is an average and an industry norm. There is no normal. Okay,
Correct.
and there's no standard or set compensation or fees in any way, shape, or form. We're just saying that this is kind of what the average is being paid out, kind of going on.
And another survey that come out, how is a buyer and seller handling their commission? So about 25% of your recent sellers, they are negotiating. And while
And
the other 23% recent buyer, they're negotiating. So, agent, be aware that you may have to do some negotiation and process, but understand, know your worth, okay? And know what is it you want to do, and make this a transition where everybody's happy.
Well, but overall, like we have seen a shift here in buyers and sellers negotiating with their agents on compensation. And
Mm-hmm.
so basically what this study points out is that roughly half of the folks didn't try to negotiate their compensation with their agent, right? And then about 25% of folks
Did
did
negotiate.
try and negotiate, but and were successful in negotiating the compensation down. About 25% of the time, the folks did try and negotiate with their agent and were not able to get the agent to
Move.
move on or to alter what the compensation they're asking for. And so they still went through with the transaction. So it's one of those things. Do you have to be prepared as an agent? Are your clients going to discuss your compensation with you?
Absolutely.
Your compensation is negotiable. Now, there's a lot of folks that don't feel like it should be negotiable. And we are kind of along those same lines. These are the services we provide. These are the fees that we charge. If you don't like that, I got nothing but love for you. But these are the fees that we charge. These are the services we provide. You don't have to work with me. There's a lot of other people that will probably do it cheaper. I don't know anybody that's going to do it better. And that's kind of our basic take.
Well, it's like going to, like I said before, it's like going to a doctor. Well, you got issue with your knee. You don't want to go to an ear, throat doctor because they can't help you. Okay. And for us, we are the subject expert in the matter. So why would you want to go somewhere else or listen to the internet, which is full of information, and decipher which one is the right choice for you?
Right. So, kind of wrapping up here from the Federal Reserve, when the results of their paper was, look, you know what? Overall compensation has been dropping since the 90s. However, the downward trend is basically related to home prices,
Correct.
not necessarily to any kind of rules or changes or anything like that. Now, they do think that moving forward, the settlement could lead to more substantial changes in our industry, but they don't have any kind of take on that. Now, for us, one thing that we do want to kind of throw into this little wrap up here is there was a recent agent survey which said,
This is for the realtors and real
yeah,
estate agents out there.
yeah, and they said, how do you believe in speaking about the NAR settlement? How do you think that's going to impact your day to day operations? And honestly, more agents said that it was either very significant or extremely significant in impacting their day to day operations. And then, did they agree with the terms of the settlement? And the vast majority of agents strongly disagreed or somewhat disagreed with it.
But there's more strongly agree with the settlement than not.
Yeah. But then also, like they said, okay, do you believe that the settlement is going to be negative or very negative? The vast majority were somewhat and strongly negative about
About
what
80%.
roughly felt that it was going to be really negative. And then here we are. looking at compensation has actually gone up. And so our what we hope that you take from this conversation and what we're seeing, right?
Is please provide value to your client. When you provide value, the client feel like you're worth every dollar and every penny of the transaction.
Yeah, keep servicing your buyers and your sellers. Keep their needs
Above
first and
yours.
foremost out there, right? Because without our clients, there's no point in us being here.
Correct.
So they are first and foremost. Um,
Don't get distracted with all these what I call chatters in the background, because at the end of the day, your business is your business, and the way you conduct yourself is a reflection of how much business you have.
I mean, right now there's so many of these distractions, right? From
Absolutely.
lawsuits and who's suing who and who's doing this, negative news, tariffs, mortgage rates, yada yada yada. Listen, good agents will be compensated for what they're worth.
Not only that, they'll help the client overcome whatever obstacle that may be there, and given a different perspective on how to look at things to where they can see a perceived value in the future.
So focus on what you're worth, the value that you provide in a transaction, and don't get wrapped up in all the news and noise and that kind of
Absolutely.
stuff. So we can be any kind of service. My name's Alan Richards. I'm the managing broker here at Maximum One Realtor Partners.
And my name is Ming Richardson, the compliance broker for Maximum One Realty and Realtor Partner. Thank y'all for watching, and we appreciate you. Come back and see us soon.
Bye.